What happens when the dream you've chased your whole life gets ripped apart just because you dared to be different? Picture this. A man pours 25 years of sweat and sacrifice into owning his own private island, a sanctuary, a hard-earned slice of freedom. Then one morning, the roar of bulldozers tears through his peace, and strangers claim his land as theirs. Will he roll over and take it, or fight tooth and nail to take back what's his? This is Marcus Jackson's story, and trust me, you won't want to miss a second of it. If you love gripping tales packed with emotion, tension, and unexpected triumphs, hit that like button and subscribe right now so you don't miss a single part. Let's dive in. Marcus Jackson had spent 25 years chasing this dream. A black man born to factory workers and maids in a Rust Belt town, he'd worked night shifts at warehouses, skipped vacations, and saved every dime to buy his private island on Sapphire Lake. 2 acres of freedom, linked to Pinecrest Point by a creaky wooden bridge, it was his escape from a world that often saw him as less. The deed was ironclad. This was his land. 6 months in, he'd planted rose bushes to honor his grandmother, who'd raised him on stories of resilience, and young oaks to shade his future. Each morning, he'd sip coffee on a bench he'd built himself, watching the sun paint the water gold. It was peace until the bulldozers shattered it. He jolted awake to a roar that shook his cabin's thin walls. Stumbling outside in faded boxers, he saw yellow machines tearing through his garden fence. Petals from his rose bushes scattered like blood, and his oaks snapped under steel treads. "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, voice raw with panic. The workers, white men in hard hats, kept their heads down, engines drowning him out as they gouged his earth. His chest tightened. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. "Sir, Pinecrest Point HOA says they've got permits." The cop replied, voice flat, like Marcus's pain didn't register. Permits for his island? Fury surged through him. Throwing on a worn hoodie, Marcus stormed across the muddy wreckage of his lawn. A white woman in a crisp blazer stood by a gleaming black SUV, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair untouched by the chaos. "Excuse me," he said, forcing his voice steady. "What's happening here?" She glanced up, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "Mr. Jackson, I presume?" "Judith Palmer, president of the Pinecrest Point Homeowners Association. We're installing 172 solar panels on your eastern shore for the community's benefit." Her words were clipped, her tone dripping with the assumption he wouldn't understand. "This is my private property," Marcus snapped, stepping closer. "You can't just—" "Actually, we can," she cut him off, pulling a document from her designer bag. "Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the covenant you signed gives us access to waterfront properties for community improvements. Maybe you should have read the fine print, Mr. Jackson." Her eyes flicked over him, his hoodie, his bare feet in the dirt, like he was an intruder in her pristine domain. Marcus's stomach twisted. He'd signed a thick stack of papers at closing, rushed by a cheap white lawyer who'd muttered, "All standard, don't worry." Now every word felt like a trap. "I want to see that covenant again," he demanded, voice low. "Stop by the HOA office anytime," she said, her smile sharp and cold. "But the work continues." As she spoke, a bulldozer crushed his bench into splinters, the crack echoing in his chest. That night, floodlights blazed across his island, workers digging into the dark. Miss Clara, his neighbor, an elderly black woman with a cane and a fire in her eyes, rowed over in her small boat. "Heard the ruckus," she said, stepping onto his dock with care. "This ain't right, Marcus." "They say it's legal," he muttered, staring at the glaring lights. "Can they do this?" Miss Clara's jaw tightened. "Judith's been ruling this place like her kingdom for 3 years. That solar plan was for the community center until she eyed your island. Tried to buy it last year, but the old owner wouldn't sell to her kind." A chill snaked down Marcus's spine. This wasn't just about power, it felt personal. And in this wealthy, mostly white enclave, he couldn't shake the thought. Did they pick me because I'm black? His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "They'll test you, Marcus, but you stand tall." Marcus couldn't sleep, floodlights piercing his blinds like daggers slicing through the night. He called Jamal, his lawyer, as dawn broke over Sapphire Lake. "That clause looks fishy," Jamal said, voice sharp over the crackling line. "Might have been amended. Shady as hell. I'll dig into county records. Don't sign anything else, man." Marcus nodded silently, staring out at the steel frames rising on his shore, cold invaders staking claim to his hard-won land. He grabbed his keys and drove his beat-up boat to the HOA meeting that night, heart pounding against his ribs like a prisoner begging to break free. The community center buzzed with voices, mostly white faces, their whispers hushing as he slipped into a back row, feeling every eye bore into him like he'd wandered into forbidden territory. Judith stood at the podium, all polished smiles and power, her blazer screaming wealth. "The solar initiative will cut your electric bills by 35% and score us green community tax breaks," she declared, voice smooth as silk. A middle-aged white guy in a polo shirt raised his hand, brow furrowed. "I thought the panels were going on this roof." "Engineering survey ruled it out," Judith replied, unflinching, her lies sliding out effortlessly. "Mr. Jackson's island gets 40% more direct sunlight. Perfect location." Marcus shot to his feet, anger boiling over. "Did anyone ask me? Or show me this so-called survey?" The room fell silent, tension thick as tar. Judith's lips tightened into a thin line. "Mr. Jackson, we welcome input, but please wait to be recognized." Kara Matthews, vice president, stood, her oversized sunglasses glinting under the lights, her smile sharp as a blade. "New homeowners need to learn how things work here. Marcus, you'll see the benefits soon enough." Her tone carried that old edge, "Stay down, boy," one he'd heard too many times growing up. "Benefits of you trashing my land without asking," he fired back, voice rising. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Judith waved a hand, and a burly security guard approached. "Escort Mr. Jackson out. He's disrupting protocol," she said coolly. The guard grabbed his arm. Marcus yanked free, walking out on his own terms. Miss Clara's nod caught his eye. She saw it too. Jamal called the next morning, voice grim. "Amendment's real, but it needed 75% homeowner approval and state registration. I can't find either. We need hard proof." Hope sparked in Marcus's chest. That evening, Miss Clara rode over, whispering, "Judith's husband owns the solar company. Karen's cousins got the maintenance contract. They're pocketing cash, and they hate you rocking their boat." Marcus's fists clenched tight. 2 weeks later, 172 panels reflected blinding light into his cabin all day, their maintenance lights blinking relentlessly at night, stealing his sleep. Complaints and an inspector's report, code violations, went nowhere. "Certified pros," Judith sneered over the phone. Neighbors avoided him at the pool. "They banned my kid after I questioned fees," one woman murmured, then fled. A $200 daily fine arrived for replanted flowers. At 3 a.m., desperate, Marcus found his dad's journal in the attic. Hybrid poplars, empress trees, 8 to 12 feet yearly. Privacy screens. An idea flared. He rode to Miss Clara's at dawn. "I'll block those panels with trees." She grinned. "Got seedlings special mix, grow fast." "Let's hit him." They loaded 200 saplings, plotting their spots. That night, he planted in darkness, hope rising. A flashlight hit him. "What's this?" a guard growled. "Gardening," Marcus said, grinning. "Bugs hate the dark." "Palmer's orders, report this," the guard snapped. Marcus braced, but the guard softened. "Dad lost his farm to developers. I'm off till 2 a.m. Marcus finished by dawn, 200 soldiers whispering his father's pride. Sunrise bathed Marcus's island in soft light, his 200 saplings standing like green warriors against the solar panel's harsh gleam. He sipped coffee on his porch, savoring the quiet rebellion, when Karen Matthews's white SUV screeched across the bridge, tires howling like a cheap horror flick. She stormed out, face flushed with rage, her designer heels sinking into the muddy shore as she waved a manicured hand. "Remove those trees right now," she barked, voice shrill enough to wake the fish. Section 12.4 says unauthorized modifications threaten community assets. Those weeds are a violation. Marcus set his mug down, leaning on the rail with a slow, deliberate grin. Section 5. 7 says natives stop erosion. Your bulldozer's mess, Karen. Guess my trees didn't RSVP to your fancy rulebook. Her eyes narrowed, lips twitching like she'd swallowed a lemon whole at his jab. The board's voting tonight, she hissed, venom dripping from every word. Fines'll bury you deep. You'll earn your place, Jackson, one way or another. She spun around, stomped back to her SUV, and peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust and spite in the morning air. Midday, his phone buzzed. Check email proof. Scanned HOA minutes from 2 years back popped up. No vote for his island. Just the community center approved for solar. Marcus's pulse raced. This was pure gold. He printed the pages. The printers hum a battle anthem as he clutched the evidence, his ticket to fight back. The HOA meeting crackled with tension. The community center packed wall to wall with restless neighbors. Judith stood at the podium, slamming her gavel like a judge in a bad mood, her hair still perfect despite the humidity. Jackson's trees are deliberate sabotage. Remove them and pay damages, she declared, her eyes glinting with cold triumph. Marcus rose, plugging his phone into the projector with a steady hand. The minutes flashed on the wall, stark and undeniable. No vote for my land, he said, voice cutting through the room like a blade. Where's your 75% approval, Judith? Or did it get lost in your purse with your conscience? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, doubt, a few stifled snickers at the dig. Harold, a grizzled ex-treasurer with a smoker's rasp, stood slowly, adjusting his glasses. He's right. Big projects need a full vote. Never saw one for this island nonsense. Judith's smile froze, brittle as ice. Plans evolved due to engineering demands, she snapped, but the excuse landed flat, and the room buzzed with unease. After the gavel fell, 3 neighbors, Pete, a burly contractor, Lisa, a sharp-eyed reporter, and Thomas, a quiet guy sick of panel glare ruining his deck, cornered Marcus near the exit. We're in, Pete said, clapping his shoulder hard enough to rattle his bones. This whole deal smells like a con job. Dawn broke with a gut punch. Chainsaws whined like a swarm of angry bees, flames licking his trees, 5-foot trunks curling black, sap popping like gunfire in the still air. Workers shuffled nearby, heads bowed in guilt. Fire safety, Derek, the crew boss, muttered, avoiding Marcus's burning stare. Marcus whipped out his phone, filming the destruction, his hands trembling with rage. Then he spotted Karen on the bridge, snapping pics with a smirk that could curdle milk. She bolted when he locked eyes with her, tires squealing as she fled the scene of her crime. Fire trucks roared, and minutes later, Chief Rodriguez leapt out, face red with fury. No permit filed. This is straight-up arson, he bellowed, his crew dousing the flames with jets of water, saving half Marcus's trees, though the rest stood as charred skeletons, a graveyard of his defiance. That night, thunder rolled over Sapphire Lake, dark clouds piling up like an army on the march. Lightning split the sky, a jagged bolt slamming the panel's control box with a crack that shook his cabin. A deafening boom. Then silence, save for the rain tapping his roof. Dawn revealed the wreckage. 30 panels cracked like bad glass, wires dangling uselessly. His phone pinged again. Email, fire evidence. Photos showed Karen slipping cash to Derek under a flickering streetlight. Judith scrawled order reading. Remove trees by any means necessary. Marcus's blood surged. This wasn't just proof. It was a loaded gun. The HOA called an emergency meeting mandatory, the air thick with stakes. He texted Miss Clara. You there? With the DA child, she shot back. Bring the hammer. Marcus grabbed his phone, evidence hot in his pocket, ready to swing. This fight wasn't just about his land anymore. It was his grandmother's voice, stand tall, Marcus, and his dad's pride in every root he'd sunk into this earth. Marcus strode into the community center, phone heavy with evidence, the air buzzing like a hive ready to burst. Chairs overflowed with neighbors. Whispers swirled. TV news vans hummed outside, their lights casting shadows through the windows. Karen perched up front, sunglasses perched like a crown, smirking as if she still owned the room. Harold, the HOA lawyer, fidgeted at the podium, sweat glistening on his bald head. Miss Palmer's absent. Urgent business, he croaked, voice cracking under the pressure. Police raiding her house, more like. Mrs. Gonzalez hollered from the back, sparking gasps and a few sharp laughs. Karen lunged for the mic, her heels clicking furiously. Enough. We're voting fines for Jackson's sabotage, trees, and that lightning stunt. Her voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Sabotage. Marcus stepped forward, grinning wide. I don't call lightning, Karen. Want a bill for the light show? The room chuckled, tension easing for heartbeat. Harold coughed, adjusting his tie. Mr. Jackson's recognized. Marcus plugged in his phone, projecting the damning photos. Karen's bribe to Derek in grainy dawn light. Judith's order scrawled bold. Remove trees by any means. Gasps erupted, a wave of shock crashing over the crowd. Fakes! Karen screeched, lunging for the projector, her sunglasses slipping as she flailed. The doors banged open. Miss Clara marched in, cane tapping like a war drum, flanked by Day Rivera in a crisp gray suit and two stone-faced cops. Financial fraud and property destruction, Rivera announced, voice steel. Matthews, sit down. Karen froze, her bravado crumbling like cheap plaster, glasses clattering to the floor. Rivera turned to the crowd, unflinching. Solar Company's Judith's brother-in-law. Triple market rate, $438,000 wired, half kickback offshore. Thomas leapt up, red-faced. For clean energy? Fees doubled. Maintenance funds dry. Miss Clara snapped, fire in her eyes. They robbed us blind while preaching green. Harold gripped the podium, voice shaky. HOA's liable, trees, that burn, could bankrupt us. Karen bolted for the exit, heels skidding, caught mid-stride by a cop's firm grip. Let go. My husband, she shrieked. Spilling at the station, the cop replied, dry as dust. Miss Clara stood, cane steady. Marcus fought this alone, black man's backbone against their greed. Applause thundered, hands clapping, feet stomping, a tide turning. Midnight pinged his phone. Truth.pdf. Amendment 8.3, buried for years. Private land needs consent. Forged papers, their lie unmasked. Marcus paced his cabin, adrenaline still pumping, when dawn brought Judith. Rain-soaked, coat dripping, barging in uninvited. Fines at $750 daily, she spat, eyes wild. Your kind's trouble ends here. Always has. Illegal without notice, Marcus said, hitting record on his phone. This says you needed my yes. Fraud's your game. Her face twisted, venom-bared. My husband, she started. A knot cut her off. Margaret, ex-treasurer, silver hair wet, files in hand. He's under federal watch. Kickbacks to judges, she said, voice calm but cutting. Judith stormed out, snarling, You'll pay for this, Jackson. The door slamming like a gunshot. She's a cornered rat, Margaret warned, setting files on his table. Watch your back. Hours later, smoke curled from his shore. Trees ablaze again, Judith's parting sting. Marcus grabbed his phone, heart sinking but fists clenched. His grandmother's words rang, stand tall. He'd fight to the end, for his land, his dad's pride, and every root still standing. Marcus sprinted to his shore, smoke clawing at his throat as he broke through the haze, the acrid sting burning his eyes. Flames devoured his trees, 5-foot trunks twisting into black husks, leaves curling to ash in a crackling requiem, heat pulsing against his skin. HOA workers stood frozen, hoses dangling uselessly, their faces pale with shame under the rising sun. Stop it, he roared, voice ragged from the smoke and fury. A skinny kid in a hard hat edged forward, voice trembling. Judith called it in, said we'd be fired, out on the street, if we didn't torch him. Marcus yanked out his phone, filming the blaze, the leaping flames, the guilty crew, the unnecessary ruin, then caught Karen's SUV on the bridge, her smirk flashing like a predator's grin before she gunned it, tires squealing into the distance. Fire trucks roared up minutes later, sirens piercing the chaos. Chief Rodriguez leapt out, face red with rage. "No permit again. Arson, twice in a week," he bellowed, his crew blasting water in wide arcs, saving half Marcus's saplings, though the rest stood as charred ghosts, a testament to Judith's venom. Thunder grumbled that evening, dark clouds stacking over Sapphire Lake like a judgment waiting to fall. Lightning ripped the sky, a jagged bolt slamming the solar panel's control box. Sparks exploded, a boom rattling his cabin's windows. Dawn revealed the carnage. 30 panels shattered like cheap glass, wires drooping like a busted chandelier. His phone buzzed, fresh email proof. Karen's cash handoff to Derek under a flickering streetlight. Judith's order stamped with timestamps. Marcus grinned, nails for their coffin, sharpened and ready. The emergency meeting was electric. Neighbors crammed the community center, TV crews filming through steamed-up windows. Marcus strode to the front, projecting the evidence. Bribes, orders, lies glowing stark on the wall. D.A. Rivera seized the mic, her voice a steel blade. Solar scam drained $438,000. Half kickback to Judith and Karen via offshore accounts, tax-free and dirty. Miss Clara rose, cane thumping the floor like a judge's gavel. Fees doubled, maintenance funds dry. They robbed us blind while preaching green salvation. Karen bolted for the side door, heels skidding, caught mid-step by a cop's steady hand. "My husband," she shrieked, voice cracking, singing to the feds about wire fraud. The cop deadpanned, hauling her back. Judith's absence screamed louder than words. Whispers flew of handcuffs clicking at her gated mansion. "Marcus fought when we sat quiet," Miss Clara said, her eyes blazing with pride. Black man's grit shamed their greed. Applause erupted. Hands clapped, feet stomped, a tidal wave of reckoning shaking the room. 3 months later, Marcus knelt in his dirt, planting new saplings, whispering, "Dad would have loved these," cackled at their faces when they fell flat. The panels, pried off his shore, now lined the community center roof, court-ordered after the HOA's books were seized and dissected. Judith and Karen faced jail. Their empire crumbled to dust. Miss Clara and Thomas rode over with lunch, fried chicken, sweet tea, a victory feast on his dock. "Garden's magic again," Clara said, easing onto a bench with a warm smile. Thomas handed him a paper, sentences locked. 5 years each, no parole. "I was blind, Marcus, sorry," he said, voice rough with regret. "You showed us how to stand, not just gripe over beers." Marcus nodded, the apology sinking in like good rain on parched soil. "Black man's grit lifted us all," Clara said, squeezing his hand, her warmth a lifeline through the fight. New HOA rules hung in his cabin, framed like a hard-won trophy. Votes mandatory, private land untouchable, snacks at meetings. Thomas's idea, still making Marcus chuckle every time he glanced at it. Ducks paddled lazily by, the lake shimmering under a clear sky. No floodlights, no threats, just peace reclaimed at last. His grandmother's voice rang in his ears, stand tall, weaving with his dad's pride in every sprouting root. Marcus brushed dirt from his hands, roots deepening in the earth he'd bled for, a quiet triumph, fierce and whole. Lesson learned. So what's the big takeaway from Marcus Jackson's fight? It's simple but powerful. When life, or a shady HOA, tries to bulldoze your dreams, you don't have to just sit there and take it. Marcus showed us that standing up for what's yours, even when the odds are stacked against you, can turn the tide. It's about grit, guts, and not letting anyone define your worth. Whether it's your land, your voice, or your peace, the lesson here is clear. Fight for it, because no one else will hand it to you on a silver platter. Meaningful message. This story carries a message that hits deep. Justice isn't always served up easy, but it's worth chasing. Marcus didn't just save his island. He exposed greed, united a community, and proved that one person's courage can topple a rigged system. It's a shout out to anyone who's ever felt pushed down. Your roots matter, your fight matters, and sometimes the little guy can make the big shots eat their own lies. It's about reclaiming what's yours and reminding the world that fairness still has a pulse. Personal perspective. From where I stand, Marcus's story is a gut punch and a high five all at once. As someone who's seen how quick people can trample over what's right, I'm blown away by his refusal to back down. That black man's grit Miss Clara talked about, it's real, and it's inspiring as hell. To me, this isn't just about a guy and his island. It's a mirror for all of us. How far would you go to protect what you love? Marcus didn't just win a battle. He showed us what it means to stand tall when the world wants you small. Love Marcus's wild ride? Then don't miss out on more stories like this. Follow and subscribe to Story Precious right now for the latest videos that'll keep you hooked. Tales of guts, glory, and everything in between. Hit that like button, ring the bell, and join the crew. We've got fresh, gripping content coming your way. Let's keep the good stuff rolling together on Story Precious.